Hi everyone, welcome to Best Practices. I'm Laura Spalding Best, Exhibitions Manager at Scottsdale Museum of Contemporary Art. So as Exhibitions Manager, my job at SMoCA is to design and install the museum exhibitions. So that means everything physical that happens with an artwork while it's in our building. It's under my care to handle it, to prepare a space for it, and ultimately to install it or hang it. So in my time here, over the last 14 years, I've installed thousands of artworks. And the main goal of my job is to make the artwork look as good as it possibly can, with no distractions, perfectly complemented by the design and lighting and color of a space. And so the best part about my job is that I really get to work with art all the time and work with living artists, contemporary artists, and curators, and be part of a team that helps make an artist's vision an actual reality. So I'm gonna share a lot of that behind the scenes information that I have from working in a museum with you so that you can apply it to home practices. Today we're going to learn how to hang artwork at home using museum best practices. We're going to learn how to hang an artwork at eye level, how to use the appropriate tools and hardware. So let's get started. The first things that you're going to need if you're going to hang an artwork at home are hopefully simple tools that you already possess. We might have sometimes more complicated tools and systems that we use in a museum to properly install artwork. But what you really need at home is pretty simple. First, you're going to need a nice sharp pencil, a tape measure, and a level. If you don't have a level at home, technically you can just use a tape measure to make sure that you're full level, but I highly recommend one. And then lastly, you'll need a hammer. And that's really it to get started. So let's talk about hardware. What kind of hardware would you normally find on the back of a framed print? I'm gonna wear gloves because I work at a museum. You don't need to wear gloves to handle your own artwork at home, but I would always encourage you to handle your artwork with care, especially if you have a painting that's open-faced. You would want to use gloves so that you're not transferring the oils and dirt from your skin to the surface. Something that doesn't have glass or plastic in front of it is something that should be handled with care. But I apply the same rules when I handle a framed work of art. I've got this piece from our permanent collection by Louise Nevelson, and it has what I would consider the ideal framing hardware. It's got 2 D-rings on the back. That means that I can have 2 nails or bits of hardware on the wall that are going to support this evenly and safely. Ideally, when you're hanging an artwork, you want to have 2 points so that you don't have an artwork going crooked. So, especially at home, one of the things you want to do is minimize damage to your walls. So every time that you're hanging a picture, you have to make a hole for a nail or a screw. I'm going to show you what I recommend that's the safest, strongest, and does the least damage to a wall. So in the museum world and gallery world, a lot of times what we use are these brass hangers. They have a lot of different names, but essentially they have a little J hook here that the back of a picture hangs on. And the thing that attaches the brass hanger to the wall are 2 nails. 2 nails into drywall or wood that are angled like this are a really strong support for a frame. The way that this is combating gravity is really stable. And what you get from that is just tiny little nail holes in the wall. Super easy to patch or cover. They really don't make a big mess. What I would recommend avoiding is, which are often large picture nails, is something that is sold a lot, really fat nail like this. I don't recommend it unless it's absolutely necessary. It's an unnecessary sized hole in your wall. And then if you're a little off level or you need to make a tiny adjustment, it's much harder because you've already got a very large hole in the wall. So to go slightly up or down from that hole is just going to tear a larger hole in your wall. Same with screws. These can be really stable, especially going into wood where they're really biting into a lot of the meat of a wall. But if you don't need to make a large hole like that, don't. So I'll show you today, when we begin to hang an artwork, how I use these brass hangers. Now, let's hang an artwork together. The first thing we're going to talk about is hanging at eye level. So what is eye level? This is a great question. In museums and galleries, the number varies sometimes, but what I consider a standard eye level is 60 inches. That's 5 feet from the ground. And that's the average eye level for the average person. For me, that's a little bit lower than my eye level because I'm a taller person, but it reads to me in a way that makes sense. So if you attend a museum or a gallery opening, you'll see that most of the works are about the same level on the wall because they're all intentionally hung at eye level. And that might not seem like an important thing, but the way that we read and interpret an artwork when it's at that level is very different than if it was hung higher or lower. It's because we're seeing what the artist intends as the main content of an image right where our eyes are. We're able to process it with less distraction. We're able to have a more intimate view of it. And so that's why eye level is really important. In your home, eye level may not be the same thing. Sometimes you're hanging above a couch or a bed or a table, and you'll want to take that into account. So it's a good starting place no matter what. It's great to know the rules before you break the rules. So when we're talking about hanging at eye level, what we really mean is that the center of an artwork will be at eye level. In this case, 60 inches from the ground. So let's do the math and make this 60 inches off the ground. Before I measure my artwork, before I'm ready to put my hardware on the wall and mark it and nail it into place, I'm just going to look at what eye level is on the wall. So in this case, I'm going to mark it so that you can see what 60 inches from the ground looks like. I'm going to use my tape measure. I'm going to bring the bottom of it flat to the ground. And then I'm going to go right here, 60 inches. And I'm just going to you can use a little piece of tape or a Post-it. It always helps to temporarily visualize something on the wall rather than making permanent marks. So now you can see that's my goal. This is eye level. I want to get the center of my picture right here. So the first thing I'm going to do is measure my picture. What I want to get is the full height, and then I want to get what half that height is. That's the very first part of the equation. Really straightforward. So I'm going to use my tape measure. I would always recommend measuring the back of an artwork so you don't accidentally do damage with a metal tape measure to its front. So I'm going to measure from the bottom of the frame to the top, and I'm going to get a nice round number. You know, sometimes you might get an odd number, a really inconvenient one, like 27 5/8, and you've got to divide that in half. If you're hanging artwork at home, you can simplify it. If you're hanging several pieces that need to be an even grid, you've got to stick to those specific numbers. But this one's 28 inches, so I'm going to take half of that number. That's 14. So if I look at 14 on my frame, that's right here. That's the area that's going to hang where I've marked the wall. The next step is to measure from my hardware to the top of the piece. I'm going to see what the gap is from where my nails go to the top of the frame. So that is a less even number, but it's 6 3/4. I can work with that. So you already know that halfway is 14. That's my magic number. I'm working with the number 14. And I've just got the number 6 3/4 from my hardware. So the logic of this is that I'm measuring I need to measure half of the frame and take away that height of hardware, okay? So I'm gonna take 14 and subtract 6 3/4 inches. So I'm left with 7 1/4. And now I know that this is my middle, and so if I think of this being at 60 inches, what I know is that if I take 60 inches plus 7 1/4, I'm gonna get 67 1/4. And that's right where my hardware needs to be, okay? And I'll talk a little bit more about how we hang at eye level because that part can be confusing, but essentially what you're trying to do is find the relationship between the middle of the piece and where the hardware is. That's all. If my hardware was in the very center, I would just hang it at 60 inches every time. But that's not a stable way to hang an artwork. You'll never see a wire of a painting or D-rings on a frame at this level, ever. It would make it, just about where the center of gravity of a piece of artwork is. So it would make it a little wobbly, a little unstable. And so we want it usually in this upper third of a frame or a painting. Okay, so I'm going to start by measuring onto the wall. Okay, so my magic number is 67 1/4. I'm gonna be hanging it right here. I'm gonna start with finding the center of my piece, okay? Now, it doesn't really matter because it's the only piece I'm hanging on the wall right now. So if I know roughly where I want the edges, then this is fine. But my piece is 22 inches wide. And so I'm going to say that this is maybe where I want my center, okay? And again, I don't have to draw on the wall if I don't have to. So I have this piece of paper. You can use a piece of blue tape or anything that you have at home. You can even scotch tape a piece of paper to the wall, whatever won't damage your paint job. And so I'm going to visualize that the width of my piece is here. So I'll put my tape measure centered at 11, all right? And then one thing I can do is, if I wanted to visualize it, I could mark that edge and this edge with blue tape or something like that so I could really see like, oh, that's exactly where I want that piece. But in this case, I'm first going to draw the height. So it's going to be a bit above here. And I'm going to do this with pencil, but I'll mark it so you can see it. So remember my number? 67 1/4. That's the height of the hardware. So I'll just use a Post-it and mark where that is. $67 1/4. So if I was doing this at home, I would not have to worry about marking up my walls. So then I've just made what I'm going to call the center point, okay? And then I'm going to measure the distance between my two bits of hardware. And here I've got 18 3/4. So what I do is I hold my tape measure to the very center of the D-ring. So when I'm measuring it, I'll just put the metal bit of my tape measure right there. And that way I know that I want my hardware dead center. So I've got 18 and actually, you know what? We're at 18 3/4. And so, sorry about the math, but that's 9 3/8 on each side, okay? So if I start from the center, this is one of the ways that I do it without getting, without having it be clumsy using a pencil and a tape measure. I'm gonna mark 9 3/8, and I just use my tape measure to make a little mark right here. And so I can see that, but it doesn't have to be a really big gouge in your wall. And so I'm gonna do that here as well. Another 9 3/8. And so that's where I know I want my two hangers to be located on either side. Remember, this is center, and this is the height we want it at, and this is eye level. I'm going to take my level, and I'm going to look right at this level line here that I marked. This is 67 1/4. If I bring my level to that, and I watch my bubble, and I make sure that it's not only between the lines, but dead center between the lines. That I know I'm getting a nice straight line across. And I don't have to measure each point separately. The level saves me that bit of work. So then I'm gonna put up my hardware. All right, so I've got my hardware ready and I'm ready to put it on the wall. I'm gonna use my brass hangers that have 2 nails each, but if you're doing this at home and you have small picture hanging nails, 1 each will do the trick. What you wanna do is just get it dead center on this little cross that we've made on the wall. I'm gonna hammer this one up. And when I use a brass hanger, I put it so that at this intersection, the very bottom of my little J hoop is touching that bit of pencil line. All right, my hangers are up. I'm gonna take down my markers. And I'm gonna take my frame. And what I usually do is hold it so that I can access both the D-rings while I hang it. Look it up on the left and the right. And now we've got a frame hung at eye level and completely level. Okay, so we've hung the work at eye level and we know about how to hang on 2 points of contact using D-ring hardware. So if you have a frame that didn't come with that, if it has something that's sort of cheap looking, you can potentially add these things to it. You can find these anywhere that you get picture hanging supplies. Just make sure that your frame can handle it, that it's sturdy enough. But there's nothing wrong with just using 2 nails to hang any frame as long as it's got a balanced 2 point of contact. When you're hanging a wired frame, this is really common, very typical. People tend to want to put the weight on one single nail head or screw or bit of hardware in the middle, and then what you get over time, you know, when the walls shake at home, someone runs by, someone knocks loudly, you're gonna get a little bit of that. So what I would recommend is 2 points, okay? So usually when I'm hanging something at eye level that's got a wire, it doesn't have to be much more complicated. When I'm measuring the height from the wire to the top of the frame, what I'll do is take my tape measure and hold it at a standard width. So in this case, I would say, oh, it's really reasonable that I would place 2 nails at 10 inches apart. So I'm gonna hold my tape measure at 10 inches, pretend that my fingers are the points of contact, the nails holding it up. I'll keep this one here, and then I'll get this measurement, which puts me at 8 inches. And it's that simple. You can continue hanging at eye level, just like we did with our first piece. So today we've covered how to hang artwork in your home, but maybe you want to learn more from museum professionals. Do you have a suggestion for a future tutorial? Do you have questions or comments? Leave your comments below, or you can email us at SMoCA@scottsdalearts.org. Thanks for joining me today for Best Practices. I'm Laura Spalding Best.